My name is Tamma. I am an environmental consultant and trainer based in Newcastle upon Tyne, and I founded my own business, Embello Limited, in 2015 to deliver environmental consultancy and training services. You'll be able to hear from my accent that although I'm based in Newcastle, I am not from the Northeast. In fact, I'm not even from this country. I'm originally from South Africa, and as a bit of a tribute to that, I named my business Embello, which is in fact the Zulu word for environment. So before I start, I thought I'd give you a quick introduction to myself. Usually when I tell people that I'm an environmental consultant, the first question that comes is, what is that? What do you do? And one of my favorite things about my job is that I do a lot of things in a lot of different environments. A lot of the clients that I work for are in the construction industry, but I also work within the waste industry and within the manufacturing industry. And actually those three industries depend quite strongly on each other for them to be able to do what they actually do as businesses and organizations. So I really enjoy the diversity of industries, but more so how they're all connected to each other and how they can support each other. I do spend a lot of time on client sites, and those can be quite varied, often rocking a hard hat and some steel toe cap boots. And I always joke that, you know, you're an environmental consultant where you have more photos of bins and oil stores on your phone than you do of your own family, which is usually true. But also because I run my own business, and there are different elements to environmental consultancy, I'm sometimes desk-based. I usually have a lot of reports to write. I deliver training. I give talks at conferences and various industry events. And kind of through running my own business, I've also been introduced to a slightly more glamorous world of business ownership and entrepreneurship. And that usually comes with fancy dinners and award ceremonies where you get to get all glammed up, which I actually really enjoy. So yeah, steel toe cap boots in the morning, ball gown in the evening. That's a standard day in the life of environmental consultant. Embello Limited is a consultancy. So what I aim to do is I work with businesses to help them meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but to help them incorporate sustainability into their business strategy so that they can improve their own operations, but also make a positive contribution to sustainability and environmental protection. I will apologize in advance if there is going to be an environmental bias to this presentation, because I'm coming at it from that perspective in terms of achieving sustainability for now and for future generations. And what is encouraging is I've picked that up as a common theme throughout some of the other talks today. So it's good to see that it is top of everybody's agenda. So I was invited to give this talk today to talk about how construction could save the world in the context of environmental emergencies. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what environmental disasters I deal with. Again, quite a different perspective to Idris. I actually work mostly within the UK or within Europe. So we're kind of seeing the differences here between developed worlds and developing worlds. There are similarities, but it also highlights how many opportunities that there are to bring construction forward to save the world, to improve sustainability. I also want to introduce the Sustainable Development Goals because these are tools that I use a lot in the work that I do with the businesses, and ultimately going to tie that into what I consider some of the job opportunities for the future. So just to give you a bit of food for thought, really. So I don't want to reiterate this too much because I think you guys are all fairly well educated. But I usually start this with, do we understand sustainability issues? And, you know, in kind of an interactive environment, I would generally be saying, you know, who here saw Blue Planet when that came out? That was just over a year ago, actually, and it's been kind of a milestone documentary because what it seems to be is, you know, the day that David Attenborough woke the world up to some of the challenges that we've been facing for a really, really long time. It was off of Blue Planet that we became very aware of the impact that our activities are having on ocean environments, particularly with regard to plastics, but also the bigger picture of climate change. And off the back of that, there's been a huge public movement, as well as a lot of kind of legislation and governance and guidance to make sure that this comes top of the agenda for how we develop our nation going forward. And it kind of began to educate us on a level that we could all understand about some of the bigger impacts of climate change and how human activities are directly connected to those. So when we talk about environmental emergencies, I feel that I can't skip past the fact that we have declared a climate emergency. In terms of all of the environmental emergencies, this is the biggest disaster that we have to deal with, and the impacts of it are so far-reaching. There's a lot of science behind it. If anybody wants to delve into it, I'd be delighted to have a conversation off the back of this, but it is a turning point now in kind of human society where we've said we're going to begin to feel the impacts of climate change one day, and one day has arrived. And I think this year has been a stark education for all of us. You know, we kind of thought the things that happened far away from us weren't likely to affect us directly. And what we've definitely learned in the last 3 months is that we live in one world and we are all connected to each other in some way, shape or form. And therefore, this is a global issue that requires a global response. And it is an emergency. We have to take action now. In the UK, I deal a lot with environmental legislation. That's how I communicate with businesses about what their responsibilities are and what they have to do to improve their environmental performance. So again, just the best guess, you can kind of answer in your head if you want to type down an answer, but if you were to hazard a guess, how many pieces of legislation do you think there are in the UK that aim to protect the environment? We can throw out the numbers, 50, higher or lower. Well, there are over 200 pieces of legislation in the UK that aim to protect the environment and prevent environmental disasters. Quite a complicated bag. So this is one of the things that I do for fun. I help businesses understand all of the laws that apply to their activities and operations, and I help them take steps to make sure that they comply with the law and by default protect the environment. The reason that this is so important is that business activities can cause pollution. There is a legal definition of pollution, and that occurs when human activities cause harm to the environment, property, or humans, or all three. Okay, so where human activity directly causes harm to the surrounding environment. And written into UK legislation, if any of these incidences were to happen on a construction site, that would be considered an environmental emergency. In emergency situations, the business has to take action to rectify immediately. Likely to be prosecuted as well for a result, but how quickly they respond will impact how much of a penalty they will receive for the incident. And this is whether it was intentional or not. Accidental emergencies are covered within legislation as well. The way you see in these pictures, we've got massive dust emissions. That's a pollution. That's an emergency. It's bad for human health. It's bad for the environment. Really poor waste management, causing ground pollution over there. Floods affecting construction sites, which if they hadn't been set up properly are likely to cause significant amounts of communication. Things like oil, chemicals, hazardous substances which are stored on site, if that escaped into the ground or into water, you cause major issues there. And then burning anything on site, because that again contributes to air pollution. So any of these activities would be illegal within the UK and would be considered an environmental emergency. So what do I do? Well, I help businesses protect the environment and protect themselves from environmental incidences. I work with businesses to set up goals to enhance their environmental performance. So it's great that we prevent pollution. We can do a whole lot better than that. We need to do a whole lot better than that. So what can we do above and beyond what the law says we have to do? And one of the big things that is important to actually achieve this is that I have to educate and engage an entire workforce in sustainability issues, what I like to call winning hearts and minds, because everybody has to be working to a bigger objective, you know, and working collaboratively towards achieving that objective. So from all of these horrible pictures in the beginning, which would be a nightmare, a worst case scenario, what I try to do is help businesses run their operations properly by having clean and safe construction sites, taking all steps against flood defense and flood response, making sure that they manage their waste properly on site, and that they are prepared for any emergency situation, whether that's a fire or a spill or water pollution, that we can react to that as quickly to minimize the damage. And again, one of the key things is communication across the workforce and constant monitoring. You know, we know what we're trying to prevent, but are we always performing as well as we possibly can do? So we tend to run audits and monitoring and data and, you know, just to keep on top of everything. I'm a big believer in using science to validate decision making. So that, you know, usually if I'm involved, there's a whole bunch of numbers sitting behind what we're working on or what we're trying to achieve. So that's kind of how I, you know, do what I do. The reason I do it and the reason I set up my own business is because I want to help bigger businesses prevent climate change and ultimately make a positive contribution to the world through their activity. And again, working with industries like construction, manufacturing, and the waste industry, I feel that industries where I can make the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time, because those are the world crafters. You know, what our world of the future looks like sits in these three industries' hands. So that's where, you know, I choose to focus my attention. So what I do to help educate businesses is I tell them about the Sustainable Development Goals. Don't know if anybody's familiar with them. I've got, again, some suggestions for resources at the end of this, but if you don't know about the Sustainable Development Goals, whack it in Google and start reading. You really can't go wrong. There is so much interesting, cool, exciting information around this for kind of a brighter future. Basically, they are the world's to-do list for people and planet. 193 countries across the world signed up to achieve these 17 goals by 2030. Okay, so that's within the next 10 years. What's really exciting about them is they are ambitious. They are going for the gold standard of what sustainability actually looks like. And more importantly, they are giving us a roadmap and a framework on how to achieve it. So what are the key priorities? How will we monitor our progress? Where should we be focusing our attention? And it means that everybody can actually sing from the same hymn sheet, you know, as it were, that we're all talking a common language, that we're all working towards the same goals. For that reason, you'll sometimes hear them referred to as the global goals. Okay, so everywhere in the world has made a commitment to achieve the global goals. They are really, really important to construction, really relevant to the construction industry. I'm sure there've been lots of statistics today. I hope mine roughly align. Data can be interesting, depending on how old it is or where it came from. But as a rough kind of estimate of the impacts of construction, the construction industry is responsible for 40% of energy consumption, 12% of drinking water consumption, 38% greenhouse gas emissions, and 40% of solid waste. Now, this is just a representative for industrialized countries. It is not considering developing nations. But what is exciting is that although the impacts are quite significant, the life cycle of construction is so varied and so complicated that pretty much at every point of deciding what you're going to build and where, getting your materials there, building it, installing it, using it, tearing it down, recovering materials, there are opportunities at every part of that supply chain to introduce sustainability and sustainability thinking. And the SDGs give tools that can be used at every stage to ensure that construction drives sustainability for us and for future generations. So this is from the World Green Building Council, and this is kind of their analysis of how construction can support some of the individual sustainable development goals. Considering that there's 17, we've got 9 across the board here. And actually, because of the interrelatedness of the SDGs, if you make a positive impact in one, you're likely to make positive impacts in some of the other ones. But where the SDGs apply to construction is in terms of good health and well-being for the future, building homes that people are happy and safe and comfortable in, using renewable energy and becoming cheaper to run, creating work and economic opportunity around sustainable development, all the opportunities for industry, innovation, infrastructure, for sustainable cities and communities, to close the loop on how we use materials, to proactively combat climate change, you know, build for good, you know, build to enhance the environment, protecting life on land, and developing partnerships. The partnerships are really interesting because to all extents and purposes, I don't work in the construction industry. I work with the construction industry. It's a totally different career path. I'm not a construction expert by any extent. I've learned a lot, you know, from all of the sites that I work on, but what I've done is establish myself as a partner to the industry. So I think in terms of when you consider careers for the future, you can still work with construction, not necessarily in it. And I think that reiterates one of the kind of workshops just before I got on to say, you know, there are loads of different routes you can take into an industry, and you might, I think as I did, end up there without even realizing how you got there. It wasn't intentional, but it was kind of the perfect place to be. And again, because I am a sustainability optimist and because I proactively work within this industry to bring about a greener future, what really excites me is what the job scope, you know, jobscape of the future looks like. This is from the World Employment and Social Outlook campaign or data collection in 2018. And what's super exciting is that they're saying that 18 million more jobs will result from achieving the Paris Agreement, keeping climate change below 2-degree rise, and 6 million more jobs will be resulted from embracing the circular economy. And across the world, 1.2 billion jobs depend on a stable and healthy environment. So it goes to show that if we look after, you know, if we put sustainability at the heart of how we address construction, move forward in construction, we're going to be creating the jobs for ourselves, you know, and I think that is what's exciting. There is so much opportunity in this industry. It is such an exciting time to be moving into industry because the world is moving right now, and there is a change in attitudes and expectations that I really think, you know, as awful as the last couple of months have been, this is the one positive most people are taking away. We want the world to be better after this, you know, not back to the same old, what's the new going to look like? My closing bits of advice are, if you don't know what you want to be, that's okay. When I was at school, nobody told me I could grow up to be an environmental consultant because that wasn't a job that people did. Nobody told me I could have my own business. What I found was opportunities based on things that I enjoy, and I basically created a job for myself. And I think that is what the future looks like. Apparently 65% of today's 12-year-olds will have jobs that don't even exist yet. I mean, that's crazy, but it's true. We're moving so fast. Most importantly, and I think I reiterate a lot of speakers here, follow your interests. Just do what you find interesting, and it will ultimately take you to where you're going to be, where you're supposed to be in the future, whether you know what that is now or not. And do what you feel passionate about. I think my job is one of the greatest privileges. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Running a business is the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm scared every day because I think the climate emergency is that big and we've got a lot of work to do, but I feel extremely passionate about it, and that's what keeps me going every day, even when it feels like a really, really high mountain to climb. Most importantly, never stop learning. Keep exploring, keep connecting with people, share your discoveries, deepen your understanding, just absorb information, and you'd be amazed at where you might end up. If you do want to have a look at the SDGs, there is a resource section especially for students. It's just there, but if you Google Sustainable Development Goals for Students, it'll take you there. Loads of stories, loads of resources, but also ideas for how you can positively contribute to the SDGs. So if this is something you care personally about, start exploring it now, and it may very well be a career that you pursue in the future.